The Supreme Court has made a decision about homelessness in the United States, and it is not good for those that are unhoused. Now, we have to distinctly make sure that we explain the difference between people that are unhoused and people that are homeless, right? You are in the way that I see it. If you do not have a permanent residence, a place to lay your head, you are considered homeless. If you're sleeping on someone's couch, I would still say that you are homeless. That's how I look at it. Not everyone that is homeless is sleeping outside. So think about it that way. Now let's talk about unhoused. People that are unhoused, these are people that really just do not have a roof over their head at all. And that would also include people who are sleeping outside that everyone refers to as homeless. They are also unhoused. So it's important that we frame it that way. And I'm going to explain to you why when we get to the Supreme Court ruling about what can happen to those who are unhoused. I want to start with this clip here because I want you to understand how tent communities have been spreading across the United States. And we also want to debunk the narrative that everyone that is unhoused is on drugs. That is false. I know several of you have worked with me before. We have been out on the streets feeding people that are unhoused. And I can tell you a good number of those people are not on drugs. A lot of the people that are unhoused have been evicted. This goes all the way back to the eviction moratorium. A lot of those people have been evicted. Some of those people just got caught up in hard times. Some of them have been pushed out because their neighborhoods have been gentrified and they just could not afford the rent. And some of them, yes, do have jobs. Not everybody sleeping outside is unemployed. So we have to understand that. And I feel like I've been sounding the alarm about this for the past 3 years. Actually, ever since I started the show, that if people did not take and pay attention to what was happening with the tent communities, that this was not a problem that was unique with San Francisco, that it would spread across the country. And here we are. Let's get to this clip here from ABC News. I want you to see one person's account of what it is like for them to be unhoused. Check this out.
Welcome back. Sprawling encampments of unhoused people dotting many of the country's biggest cities are ubiquitous reminders of homelessness here in America. But now a growing number of communities are taking what's being seen as punitive approach to clear them out, making it a crime in some places to sleep outside, even when some say they have nowhere else to go. So is it cruel and unusual punishment? The Supreme Court will tackle that question next week. And Devin Dwyer reports for us from Grants Pass, Oregon, about what's at stake.
On the banks of the Rogue River, tucked away under trees on the side of the road, even in center field of the local Little League ballpark, the homelessness epidemic is inescapable, even in sleepy Grants Pass, Oregon. Population 40,000, roughly 600 call parks like this one home. Brandon, a 38-year-old Grants Pass native, says he has no choice.
So the city came in and said you can't camp right there on those wood chips.
The officer said I was too close to the playground and I was too close to the fence.
Local law requires that he move his camp every 72 hours. The city had tried to ban camping in parks outright, but was blocked by a federal court for now.
If I don't feel like I belong, I'm going to feel like an outsider, and then I'm going to want to continue doing the same thing because there's no reason to thrive for anything different.
There's no place to go.
Helen Cruz knows the indignity firsthand. Over 5 years living in parks before a nearby church took her in, she says she received more than $5,000 in camping-related fines.
I was holding down 2 jobs when I was out here, and still not enough to be able to rent a place.
Pause. So pay attention to what she just said. When she was living in that area, she was working 2 jobs, and the income that she made was not enough for her to be able to rent an apartment. And this is what I've been warning people about for quite some time. First of all, I don't know the rule in your state, but I can tell you here in Massachusetts, for example, if you want to lease an apartment, you have to have 3 months rent up front, at least 3. Some places 4. Some places will charge first month security, last month. And then some places will charge first month security, last month, and a realtor fee. So it all depends. But if you are not making enough money to have 3 months rent up front, how are you going to lease an apartment? Now, this is where a guarantor would come in. This is where you would have a co-signer. So a lot of younger people, their parents would co-sign for them, and that's how they can get that apartment. But what if your parents are not alive? What if your parents are alive, but they don't have the credit score to be a co-signer? This is the reality for a lot of people in this country. We can get into a credit score discussion another day. And I'll tell you what I think about credit scores. But this is the reality this is happening across the country. Let's continue.
Their terms of low-income housing here is $1,000 a month. And that's not workable either, you know.
So when the police come through and they do a sweep of this area, what do they do? What do they tell you?
If you don't comply, you are trespassed and you could possibly go to jail.
The city of Grants Pass is among a growing number of American communities passing laws to crack down on homeless encampments. A perfect storm of skyrocketing housing prices, sunsetting COVID relief programs, a mental health and drug abuse crisis, and an aging population without retirement savings has led to record numbers of unhoused people nationwide.
And this is why I continue to say, look at what Nas just said. I just moved and it cost me $6,700 to move in New Jersey. This is the reality for a lot of people. There is nothing worse to me when I am just going about my day and I'm seeing elderly people. This is another thing. There's a lot of elderly people that are homeless. Imagine working all these years in this country and then you can't afford to have a place to live and you have to sleep outside. People in their 60s, people in their 70s. And then I've seen children that are also homeless. And this is why I continue to say for a long time that housing should be a right. When we think about the hierarchy of needs, one of those things is shelter. People need shelter. That shouldn't be a privilege. And it has become one. We're not taking care of people in this country. We're not giving people a roof over their head. I'm not saying you got to give everybody luxury apartments, but everyone deserves to have housing. I don't care what you do. I don't care if you have a drug issue. I don't care if you've had a record. That should not bar you from having a roof over your head. This situation has not improved. This situation is continuing to get worse. And the Supreme Court has decided to just make it worse, even more worse. We'll get to it.
For all intents and purposes, a lot of the behavior you see here today is illegal. And then our community will ask, well, what are you doing about it, Chief?
Chief Warren Hensman says his officers are caught in the middle.
We have community members in Grants Pass that are afraid to come to their parks. We've had shootings in our parks. We've had fights in our parks, chronic drug abuse in our parks. So much of our citizenry are not walking through our parks.
In 2013, the city passed an ordinance banning anyone from using a blanket, pillow, or cardboard box for protection from the elements while sleeping in public. Local Representative Dwayne Yunker says it was intended to crack down on unsanitary conditions and crime.
Critics of Grants Pass say the council has tried to criminalize homelessness. Is that what's going on here?
We do have a responsibility to keep people safe. And that's the struggle, is how we keep everybody safe. Is it safe to have a kid play in the park where there's a tent 20 feet away? I don't know what the people in the tent are doing.
But with no public...
Pause. I'm going to push back on that rhetoric there. You don't know what the people... Let's go back for a little bit because I want to show you what was around that park, the surrounding area right there. Okay. Okie dokie. Look in the background here by the tents. These are either homes or apartments. They look like houses, right? Okay. So to what the officer was saying there, I don't know what those people are doing in those tents. You don't know what the people are doing in those apartments behind those tents either. I'm sorry, I'm missing the point here. You don't know what those people are doing. So the houses are right there. That's an excuse. Being homeless should not be a crime. And this country is arresting the wrong people. You have war criminals in office. You have war criminals in DC that have actually killed people. They're not arresting those people. They're trying to arrest the people that are sleeping outside because they cannot afford housing. Instead of getting mad at people that are homeless, you should be more upset at the system. I've warned people for years about this, that developers have come in and they have bought so many single family homes that it makes it unaffordable for the average person to buy a house. I don't know about you guys, but when my grandparents were my age, they didn't have to have a 2-person income. You know what I mean? Like, my grandmother was able to stay at home and take care of my parents. People have to have a 2-income now just to pay rent. We're not even talking about having a family. We're talking about people having 2 incomes just to have a roof over your head. A lot of the people that I know that live in Boston, including those that have professional jobs, have roommates. I know one person that can afford to live by themselves, one, and they have help from their parents. So this is ridiculous. What are you supposed to do?
A tent 20 feet away. I don't know what the people in the tent are doing.
But with no public shelters inside city limits, a group of homeless residents alleged the new law was cruel and unusual punishment. They sued in federal court and won.
We're fighting between what the law is telling us and what the people want us to do and trying to make everybody happy. That's a big, huge struggle for us, a city government.
Criminalizing the victims of our failed housing policy is morally wrong and it's unconstitutional. And that's essentially what the city of Grants Pass has done by making it illegal for someone to exist while being homeless.
But it's not just Grant Pass, because now the Supreme Court has actually just made it legal for cities to criminalize homeless people. So essentially, the Supreme Court is criminalizing homelessness. Criminalizing homelessness. Let's get into it. It's a mess. It's a disaster. The Supreme Court said cities can ban homeless from sleeping outside. Where are they supposed to go? So you see, this is not just a Grant Pass issue. Let's get into this a little bit more. The Supreme Court on Friday ruled that cities may ban homeless residents from sleeping outside, rejecting a constitutional challenge to set up an anti-camping law in a decision that will have a sweeping impact on how local officials address the nation's escalating housing crisis. In a 6-3 decision, which broke along ideological lines, the court's conservative majority said that regulations penalizing people for sleeping in public spaces such as parks and streets do not constitute cruel and unusual punishment. Under the 8th Amendment, even when a community lacks indoor shelter and its unhoused residents have nowhere else to go. So this brings up another question. Who has the right to have housing? Shouldn't everyone have the right to have housing? Because why are people sleeping outside? They're sleeping outside because they can't afford the rent. Now, people can call me crazy, but I've noticed even now in these towns that are an hour and a half away from Boston, they're charging $2,000 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment. I'm talking about towns like Lowell, which is right next to the New Hampshire border. Lowell, Old Milltown, they're charging $2,000 for a 1-bedroom apartment. So the solution of move further away to get more affordable housing, it does not work anymore. And this is what I was trying to warn people about. That it would spread, that the more people move to that area, those landlords are going to start to increase the rent as well because the demand is increasing. That is not a solution. The solution is to give everyone housing. Everyone deserves to have it. And now you mean to tell me, because of this ruling from the Supreme Court, that now if you're sleeping on the street, they can throw you in jail, in the jails that are already overcrowded? Instead of getting to the root cause of the problem, they're just, let's just throw them in jail. This does not work. And the Supreme Court just gave every city in this country a green light to arrest homeless people. Now, I noticed something last year. One of the things that we do for the RB in Boston chapter is we feed homeless people. This was never an issue before. All of a sudden last year, Mayor Wu decides, we really can't have people feeding homeless people. It's not safe. So more cities started to take away the option to feed homeless people. I think my comrade JB's in the chat. JB will tell you it's illegal to feed homeless people in Orlando, Florida. So now you can't feed the people, and now you can arrest them because they're sleeping outside. Why aren't you trying to help these people? Why aren't you trying to help them get some type of housing and get back up on their feet? Help them get jobs. No, you're criminalizing them. Yes, Monique, it's not safe to feed the hungry. Yeah, they're like, no, it's not safe. You can't be around. It's not safe, And so what they do is when people will set up those tent encampments, the city will come in, they'll bring in the police, they'll sweep them out, and then they have to move to another area. It's a constant cycle instead of trying to help these people. So the response that was given was that we're going to give them temporary beds inside of Mass General Hospital. Then come to find out the temporary beds weren't even available for all the people that they kicked out of that area. And what do you mean by temporary? Why are we giving people temporary beds? People need housing. People need a roof over their head. People need some type of stability. And you are not going to have that type of stability if you're constantly having to move because the city sees you as an enemy and they're pushing you out. Instead of looking at the fact that you have all these millionaires that live in this state. You have an enormous amount of wealth in this state, and you have all these people sleeping outside. Tell me that makes sense. So now you can probably bet that other cities are going to go along with this. I can't. I can't. This is where we're at now. People protested outside the Supreme Court on April 22nd as justices reviewed the case involving city laws that restrict homeless people from sleeping in public spaces. I never in my life thought I would see this. Now I'm thinking about all the homeless people that you pass when you're going to the subway. I'm thinking about all of these things. Now, I want you to think about something for a second. You're going to throw homeless people in jail because they don't have housing. But you're allowing people who just came across the border to have housing. Everyone think about that for a second. You can look at my state, look it up. Look it up. They just put, Governor Healy just put a population of migrants into what I think was an old jail or something like that. And people in the community are like, why are you putting kids in this old jail? Like, that is not a safe place for them to be. We talked to people on this show before that live in Roxbury, which is a predominantly Black community, is one of the poorest neighborhoods in Boston, how they felt about the city closing down their recreation center and bringing in migrant population to live in the recreation center. And they were pretty livid. They said, what are our kids supposed to do? They go to the rec center. That's what they're supposed to do. So this, again, is a design to pit the workers against each other. Because Now what you're seeing is that working class Americans whose communities are affected by this, now they're upset at the migrant community because the city and the state are doing things for them that they're not willing to do for those who were born here. And that's exactly what the ruling class wants. They want you to get mad at the other workers. But I make that point because that goes to show you that if they can give housing to people who just came here, they can also provide housing for people who were already here. And they're not doing it. There's going to come a time in this country, don't know if it'll happen during my lifetime, but there's going to come a time during this country where I really do think people have got to a point where they've had enough. Because we are constantly seeing, as much as we complain about the politicians, the courts are working against you too. The court system works against working class people too. The court system works against poor people too. Capitalism works against poor people too. The billionaires work against poor people too. Those are the people that are constantly being attacked. Whether it's Joe Biden who's in office or Donald Trump who's in office, whether it's Republicans who have control of the House or Democrats that have control of the House, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, all of these industries work against the working class people. All of them. No one should be homeless in this country. No one. And nobody is stopping developers from buying up the single family homes, from buying apartment buildings and increasing the rent. Where are all these people supposed to go? So I ask that question again. Who has the right to have housing? I would say that everyone in this country has the right to have housing. And no one should be thrown in jail because they don't have a place to live. Eric had a really good point about this. So thank you for this, Eric. Eric said, Sabby and call for Congress. There is an obvious fix. Build tons of quality public housing. Build it. But real estate interests see every low-cost housing unit as a threat to their profits, so they won't allow it. Money and corruption in action. And this is true. Eric is referring to this article here that says the Supreme Court allows cities to enforce bans on homeless people sleeping outside. So this is very important for people to understand. All you have to do is build the housing. That's it. They did this in Mississippi. In Mississippi, this is how they decreased their homelessness rate. They were like, oh, let's just build more housing. It's that simple. But that doesn't meet the interests of developers. This always goes back to a capitalist system. There's no money in that. Does everyone understand? If anything you remember from the story, I want you to leave with this. This is happening. The reason why they are not building housing for everybody, which they can, is because there is no profit in that. So now they can just arrest homeless people just for being homeless and put them into jails that are already overcrowded. But the system is not fundamentally broken. The system is working exactly the way they want it to work, which is against you. I've read, I think 4 or 5 Supreme Court rulings so far. And it just, and I'm going to say this again too, because something else I want to add to this. Now I want you to remember For those who say foreign policy is not important, think about this for a second. Our country, this country has sent billions of dollars to Ukraine. Our country sends $3.8 billion to Israel every year. But now the people who are homeless, they are going to criminalize those people and throw those people in jail. We are not investing that money in the United States for the people here. It's a damn shame. And you know, I understand why people who have left this country have decided not to return. I understand why. Such a mess. But this is what happens in a capitalist system. Let's go to some of the comments here. Torwin said, Finland Housing First program has been very successful because it helps people with job counseling and retaining long-term housing. Yeah, and we can have that here. It's just, again, like, people really have to get angry enough to push back on your representatives about this, because this is insane. And yes, of course, you can expand the Supreme Court. Yes, there should not be lifetime appointments at the Supreme Court. I totally get all of that. But right now, it is what it is. And they already made the ruling. So now it is important that you push back on your city officials. This is why it's important that you need to know who your city councilors are. You need to contact your city councilors. You need to contact your mayor's office. You need to contact your governor's office and ask them not to enforce this. You never know. One day it could be you. Ender says people living in their cars too. Yep. I've had students living in their car. There was an adjunct professor that was living in their car when I worked at Northeastern. Saul says MFers work 40 hours a week and still have to live in their car. Exactly. Absalom, that's America in a nutshell. Make a law against a problem rather than deal with the core problems. 100%. DC, I lived out of my vehicle for most of 2015, and I'm about to lose my housing again. Shit is unaffordable, can't afford food and rent. And this is happening in the United States of America. This is why I push back when people say we're the greatest country. We're not the greatest country. How are we the greatest country and we don't take care of our people? How are we the greatest country and people here don't have a place to live? People can't afford food. And Mustard Gene says, I'm homeless and also near Grants Pass. So he's near the area that I was featuring earlier in the other clip. I don't know, man. It's a mess. Absolute mess.